You know the feeling. You're driving down a road you've traveled 1,000 times. Your hands know the turns before your mind does. The sequence of traffic lights, the faded billboard on the corner, the large oak tree marking the entrance to your neighborhood. It's all part of the predictable, invisible code of your daily life. It's comforting. It's real. But then, one day, something is different. The oak tree is gone, not cut down with a stump left behind as evidence. It's just gone. The sidewalk is seamless, the grass is undisturbed, as if it was never there at all. You shake your head. You blame fatigue, stress. You tell yourself you must have simply forgotten it was removed months ago. The next day, you drive down the same road, and the oak tree is back, its branches swaying in the wind as if it had been standing there for a century. As if you were the one who was wrong. Or perhaps it's a conversation. You're talking to a friend, and you're hit with a wave of déjà vu so powerful it almost makes you dizzy. You know, with absolute certainty, what they are going to say next, and they do. But then, it happens again and again. The same words, the same gestures, the same brief 3-second loop of conversation plays out 3 times in a row before reality snaps back into place, leaving your friend confused by your silence and leaving you with a cold dread in the pit of your stomach. These moments are fractures in the looking glass of our world. They are not hauntings. They are not ghosts. They are proof that the solid, predictable reality we navigate is built on a fragile, invisible set of rules. A code that can be corrupted. A program that can crash. These are glitches in the matrix. What happens when that crash isn't just a fleeting moment? What happens when you fall through the crack and find yourself in a place where the rules no longer apply? Today, we are exploring 7 true, unsettling accounts from people who witnessed reality breakdown before their very eyes. From a floor in a building that shouldn't exist to a day that refused to end, these stories will make you wonder if the world you know is as solid as it seems. But before we question everything, make sure you are subscribed to Whispered Fear and have activated the bell. You don't want to be disconnected when the system reboots.
Now on wrong floor.
Our first story of a reality crash comes from Leo, a 34-year-old data analyst who prided himself on precision. His world was one of numbers, spreadsheets, and predictable outcomes. He worked for a small but successful tech firm that occupied the entire 3rd floor of the Morrison building, a sleek, unremarkable office block of concrete and smoked glass. The building had 3 floors of offices, a lobby on the ground floor, and 2 levels of underground parking. 3 floors. It was a fact as solid and unremarkable as the building itself. Leo's routine was a testament to his nature. He arrived at 8:58 a.m., took the same elevator to the 3rd floor, and left at precisely 6:02 p.m. He knew the specific hum the elevator made as it passed the 2nd floor, the way the doors always side open with a slight delay on the 3rd. He had been doing this for 6 years. The building's predictability was a comfort. It was a constant in a world of variables. One Tuesday evening, he was working late, trying to finalize a quarterly report before a big presentation. The office slowly emptied around him, the usual symphony of keyboard clicks and quiet conversations fading until only the low hum of the servers remained. By 9 p.m., he was the last one there. He packed his briefcase, turned off his desk lamp, and walked the familiar path down the silent, dimly lit corridor to the elevators. He pressed the call button. The doors slid open with their usual hydraulic sigh. He stepped inside the empty, steel-walled car, the scent of industrial cleaner hanging in the air. He pressed the button for the ground floor, G. The doors closed, sealing him in the small, quiet space. The elevator began its smooth, familiar descent. He watched the floor indicator lights. 3, then 2. He felt the familiar, gentle lurch as the car slowed. He expected the next light to be G, followed by the opening of the doors into the brightly lit lobby. But that's not what happened. Instead of stopping at 2, the elevator continued its descent. The indicator light for 2 went out, but the light for G didn't illuminate. The car traveled for another few seconds in silent darkness, a period of movement that felt impossibly long. Leo frowned. A malfunction, perhaps? Then the elevator stopped. It wasn't the gentle stop of a normal arrival. It was abrupt, a sudden halt that made the car shudder slightly. A soft electronic chime, one he had never heard before, echoed in the small space. And on the panel above the doors, a new number, lit up, its red glow stark in the dim light. Leo stared at it, his logical mind scrambling for an explanation. 4th floor? That's impossible. This building only has 3 floors. He thought it must be a system error, a bizarre electrical fault. He expected the elevator to reset, to jolt back into motion and continue its journey to the lobby. Instead, the doors slid open. The scene before him was not the lobby. It was not the parking garage. It was an office floor, and it was his office floor. The layout was identical to the 3rd floor he had just left. The same gray carpet, the same open-plan cubicles, the same glass-walled conference room at the end of the hall. But it was all wrong. A thick, uniform layer of dust covered every surface, like a blanket of gray snow. The air was heavy, stale, and smelled of decay and stagnant water. The large windows that should have shown the glittering lights of the city at night were black, opaque, as if painted over from the outside. The only light came from a single, flickering fluorescent tube in the ceiling, which cast a sick, greenish glow over everything and made a sound like a dying insect. The office was in a state of arrested decay. Desks were still there, but the chairs were overturned. Computer monitors, old CRT models from a bygone era, sat on the desks, their screens dark and cracked. Papers were scattered across the floor, yellowed and curled at the edges. A coffee mug lay on its side, a dark, moldy residue caked inside. This wasn't his office. It was the ghost of his office, a version that had been abandoned, left to rot for decades. A cold dread, entirely separate from logic, began to creep up Leo's spine. He stood frozen in the open doorway of the elevator, 1 foot in his reality, 1 foot in this impossible other. He knew with a certainty that defied reason that he should not step out of the elevator. He fumbled for the door close button, his fingers suddenly clumsy and numb. He jabbed it once, twice. Nothing happened. The doors remained open, an invitation into the decaying facsimile of his world. He tried the G button again. It didn't light up. He pressed 3, 2, even the emergency alarm button. The panel was dead. He was trapped, docked at a floor that did not exist. He was about to shout for help, to scream, when he heard a sound. From deep within the abandoned office. A single rhythmic thump, followed by another. Thump, thump. It was the sound of a heavy industrial paper cutter, the kind they had in the copy room on the 3rd floor. The sound of its heavy arm being brought down over and over. The sound was coming from the far end of the hall, from where the copy room should be. He couldn't see it from the elevator, but the sound was clear, methodical, and utterly terrifying in the oppressive silence. Who could possibly be in here? And why were they using a paper cutter in a derelict, unpowered office? Leo backed away from the open doors, pressing himself against the rear wall of the elevator car. The thumping continued, steady as a heartbeat. He realized he had 2 choices: stay in the elevator and wait for whatever was making that sound to come to him, or step out onto the 4th floor and find another way out. The thought of the emergency stairs crossed his mind. They were at the end of the hall, past the copy room. It was a risk, but it felt more tangible than being a sitting duck in a metal box. Gathering every ounce of courage he possessed, he made a decision. He stepped out of the elevator. The moment his feet touched the dusty gray carpet, the elevator doors behind him slid shut with a soft, final whoosh. The light for 4 on the panel went dark. He was alone. He was stranded on the floor. That wasn't there. The thumping from the copy room stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound had been. It was a listening silence, a waiting silence. Leo stood motionless, his own breathing sounding impossibly loud. He strained his ears, listening for any sign of movement, any hint of what he was sharing this impossible space with. After a long minute, he began to move, his steps slow and cautious on the dusty carpet. He had to get to the stairwell. He walked down the central corridor, past the rows of dead cubicles. The air grew colder, heavier, the smell of rot more pronounced as he moved deeper into the floor. He passed his own cubicle, or where it should have been. The nameplate was gone, the chair overturned. On the desk, where his state-of-the-art computer should have been, sat an ancient beige machine with a yellowed keyboard. He reached the copy. Room. The door was slightly ajar. The rhythmic thumping had not resumed, but he could feel a strange vibration coming from within, a low hum that he could feel in the soles of his shoes. He held his breath and pushed the door open. The room was darker than the rest of the floor. The large industrial paper cutter sat on a table in the center of the room. Its heavy cutting arm was raised in the up position. There was no one there, but the floor around the base of the table was dark, stained with something that had long since dried. He backed away slowly, not wanting to know what had made the stains. He turned his attention to the emergency exit at the end of the hall. It was his only way out. He walked towards it, his pace quickening. The red exit sign above it was unlit, dead like everything else on this floor. He reached the heavy steel door and pushed on the bar. It didn't budge. He pushed again with his full weight. It was locked, or sealed. Trapped. Panic, hot and acidic, rose in his throat. He rattled the door, his movements frantic now. It was then he heard a new sound. A soft, wet, dragging noise. It was coming from the direction he had just come from the main office area. It was the sound of something heavy and soft being pulled across the dusty carpet. He didn't want to look. He knew he shouldn't look, but he couldn't stop himself. He turned, his flashlight beam trembling, and pointed it down the long dark corridor, towards the cubicles, and he saw it. At the far end of the hall, emerging from behind a row of cubicles, was a shape. It wasn't human. It was a lurching, asymmetrical mass of what looked like old office furniture and equipment. An office chair, a computer monitor, tangled cables, pieces of drywall, all fused together into a single, grotesque entity. It was dragging itself across the floor, its limbs of broken chair legs and metal struts scraping against the carpet, making that soft, dragging sound. It had no face, no eyes, but he felt it turn its attention to him. The flickering fluorescent light glinted off a shard of broken monitor glass embedded in its mass, a single dead eye. The entity began to drag itself towards him, faster now, the sound of scraping plastic and metal echoing in the silent hall. Leo screamed, a raw, terrified sound, and threw himself against the exit door again, his fists pounding on the cold steel. The door flew open. He stumbled through, not into a concrete stairwell, but directly into the brightly lit, pristine lobby of the ground floor. The night doorman, George, looked up from his newspaper, a startled expression on his face. "Leo, everything all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Leo spun around. Behind him was not the steel fire door of an emergency exit, but the gleaming, stainless steel doors of the elevator he had stepped into on the third floor. The floor indicator above it read, G. He looked down at himself. His clothes were clean. His shoes were not dusty. He looked at his watch. It read 9:07 p.m. Only 5 minutes had passed since he had left his office. It hadn't happened. It couldn't have happened. It was a dream, a hallucination, a stress-induced waking nightmare. He mumbled an apology to George and rushed out into the cool night air, his heart still hammering. He never told anyone what he saw. How could he? But he never worked late again, and for the rest of his time at that firm, he took the stairs. All 3 flights, every single day, because he knew that the Morrison building had more than 3 floors. And he knew, with a certainty, that haunted his waking moments, that whatever lived on the 4th floor was still there, in the dark, in the dust, waiting, and its door opened only for those who were truly alone.
Again.
Our next story comes from a 24-year-old barista named Finn. For him, Reality wasn't found in grand philosophies, but in the small, tactile rituals of his morning shift. The weight of the steel milk pitcher, the precise grind of the coffee, beans, the hiss of the espresso machine. These were the anchors of his world. He worked at The Daily Grind, a small independent coffee shop with worn wooden floors and a perpetually steamy front window. His shift started at 6 a.m., the quietest hour, a time he cherished. It was a world of predictable patterns, until one rainy Wednesday when a pattern became a prison. The morning began like any other. The bell above the door chimed at exactly 6:15 a.m., announcing his first regular, Mr. Henderson, a retired professor who always ordered a large black coffee and read the newspaper for exactly 1 hour. Finn greeted him, the words a comfortable script. "The usual Mr. Henderson?" "You know it, Finn." The exchange was as much a part of the morning as the sunrise. At 6:23 a.m., the bell chimed again. A woman in a red raincoat entered, shaking water from her umbrella. She ordered a vanilla latte with oat milk. Finn made the drink, the movements automatic, his hands performing the familiar ballet of steam and espresso. He handed her the cup. She paid with her card, smiled a brief, polite smile, and left. The bell chimed her exit. The clock on the wall read 6:27 a.m. He wiped down the counter, the smell of wet pavement and coffee filling the small shop. The rain drummed a steady, soothing rhythm against the front window. He glanced at the clock again. 6:28 a.m. He started to restock the pastry case, his mind already drifting, and then the bell above the door chimed. It was 6:23 a.m. Finn paused, his hand hovering over a croissant. He looked up at the clock on the wall. The digital display clearly read 6:23 a.m. He frowned. That couldn't be right. He had just seen it read 6:28. He pulled out his phone. The screen confirmed. In 6:23 a.m. A strange, disorienting feeling washed over him. Had he misread the clock? Had he been so lost in thought that 5 minutes had somehow rewound themselves in his mind? A woman in a red raincoat entered, shaking water from her umbrella. "A vanilla latte with oat milk, please," she said. The words were identical. Her tone, her posture, the way she tucked a stray strand of wet hair behind her ear. It was exactly the same. A wave of déjà vu so powerful it was almost nauseating crashed over Finn. He felt a cold knot form in his stomach, but he pushed it down. Coincidence. It had to be a coincidence. He was tired. He made the drink. His hands felt clumsy, his movements stiff. He handed her the cup. She paid with her card, smiled the same brief, polite smile, and left. The bell chimed her exit. He stared at the door, his heart beginning to beat a little faster. He looked at the clock. 6:27 a.m. He wiped down the counter. The rain drummed against the window. He glanced at the clock. 6:28 a.m. He reached for the pastry case. The bell above the door chimed. Finn's head snapped up. The clock on the wall read 6:23 a.m. His phone confirmed it. The knot in his stomach tightened into a cold, hard stone. This wasn't déjà vu. This wasn't a coincidence. The woman in the red raincoat entered, shaking water from her umbrella. "A vanilla latte with oat milk, please." This time, Finn didn't move. He just stared at her. Her face was a mask of pleasant neutrality. She seemed completely unaware that she was a ghost, a rerun in a scene that had already played out twice. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her smile faltering slightly. "Yeah," Finn managed, his voice sounding distant and strange to his own ears. "Yeah, sorry. One vanilla latte." He made the drink, but this time he watched every detail with a terrifying, hyper-focused intensity. The way she swiped her card, the small, almost imperceptible nod she gave, the way she pushed the door open, letting in a gust of cold, rainy air. She left. The bell chimed. The clock read 6:27 a.m. He was trapped in a 4-minute loop of time. The realization didn't come with a flash of panic, but with a slow, creeping horror that seeped into his bones. He was a prisoner of the mundane. He decided to break the pattern. He had to. On the next cycle, when the bell chimed at 6:23 a.m. and the woman in the red raincoat walked in, he would do something different. He wouldn't make the latte. He would ask her a question, anything to derail the script. The bell chimed. 6:23 a.m. The woman entered. "A vanilla latte with oat milk, please." Finn took a deep breath. "Sure," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Just a strange question. But do you feel like you've been here before?" The woman's polite smile vanished. Her expression went blank. Utterly, terrifyingly blank. Her eyes, which had seemed normal just a moment before, now looked like glass, empty and devoid of recognition. She stared at him, or rather, through him as if he were no longer there. She didn't answer. She just stood, motionless, her hand still resting on her purse. "Ma'am?" Finn asked, his courage failing. She turned, her movements stiff and robotic, and walked out of the shop. The bell didn't chime. Finn watched her go, his blood running cold. He had broken the loop, but he had replaced it with something worse. Something that suggested the woman wasn't a person at all, but an automaton, a piece of code that had crashed when presented with an unexpected variable. He looked at the clock. 6:25 a.m. The loop was broken. But now what? The shop was silent. The rain had stopped. He looked out the window. The street was empty. Mr. Henderson, who should have been in his usual corner seat, had never arrived. For the next hour, no one entered the shop. The silence was absolute. Finn paced behind the counter, his mind racing. Was it over? Had he somehow fixed it? At 7:30 a.m., he was beginning to believe he had imagined the whole thing, that the stress had finally caused him to snap. Then the bell chimed. He looked up, a wave of relief washing over him, grateful for any sign of normalcy. A man he had never seen before walked in. He was tall, thin, and wore a perfectly tailored black suit that seemed out of place in the small, humble coffee shop. His face was sharp, angular, and his eyes were hidden behind a pair of dark sunglasses, despite the gray, overcast day. "Can I help you?" Finn asked. The man walked to the counter and placed a sleek, silver briefcase on its surface. He didn't order a coffee. He just looked at Finn, his head tilted slightly. "We're aware of the temporal anomaly you experienced this morning," the man said, his voice calm, measured, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Unit 734 has been recalled for diagnostics." Finn stared at him, speechless. "Unit 734? You mean the woman in the red coat?" The man in the suit gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "A minor programming error. It has been corrected. The loop has been terminated." Who are you?" Finn stammered. "We are the custodians," the man said simply. "We maintain the integrity of the system. Your disruption was noted. It was logged." He opened the briefcase. It was empty, except for a single, complex-looking device made of silver and glowing blue lights. "You were not supposed to notice the repetition. Your memory of the event was scheduled for redaction. Your deviation from the script has caused complications." The man reached into his coat and pulled out a small, silver pen-like object. "This will not be painful," he said, his voice still flat and calm. "It will simply reset your perception of the last 90 minutes. You will remember a quiet, uneventful morning. It is cleaner this way." He began to raise the device. Finn didn't think. He reacted. He grabbed the heavy ceramic tip jar from the counter and hurled it at the man. The jar struck him in the shoulder with a loud crack, coins scattering across the floor. The man staggered back, surprise flickering across his blank face. The silver device fell from his hand and clattered onto the floor. Finn vaulted over the counter and sprinted for the door. He burst out into the street, not looking back. He ran for blocks, his lungs burning, the rain starting to fall again, cold and hard. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get away from the man in the suit, away from the coffee shop, away from the terrifying knowledge that his reality was a performance, and he had just gone off script. He never went back. He left his car, his apartment, his entire life behind. He bought a bus ticket to a city he'd never been to and paid in cash. He found a new job, a new life. But he lives in a constant state of low-grade terror. He watches for people who seem too perfect, for conversations that feel too familiar, for any sign of a crack in the code. He knows that the custodians are out there, maintaining the system, and he knows that he is a loose end, a glitch they are still trying to erase. Sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, he thinks he sees them, men in black suits, standing on distant street corners, just watching, and he knows that one day they will come to finish the job, to reset his memory, to make his quiet, terrifying morning clean and uneventful once more.
Where did you park?
Our third story deals with a different kind of loop, not one of time, but of space and memory. It comes from a couple, Liam and Jenna, who learned that sometimes the most terrifying glitch isn't a dramatic tear in reality, but a quiet, impossible contradiction that rewrites your own past before your very eyes. They were celebrating their 5th anniversary. It was a simple, perfect evening. Dinner at a downtown Italian restaurant, followed by a late-night movie. Their car, a reliable blue Honda Civic, was parked in the multi-story garage attached to the cinema, a place they had parked 100 times before. They parked on the 3rd level, in space C-34, right next to a concrete support pillar. Liam remembered it specifically because he'd joked about Jenna opening her door too wide and hitting it. She had rolled her eyes. It was a normal, forgettable moment, a moment that would later become an anchor in a sea of insanity. After the movie, just after 11 p.m., they walked back to the garage. The air was cool, the building mostly empty. They took the elevator to the 3rd level. The doors opened onto a floor of echoing silence and the faint smell of concrete and gasoline. They walked to space C-34. It was empty. Liam stopped, frowning. "This is it, right? C-34? Jenna nodded, her own confusion mirroring his. "Yeah, I remember the pillar." They stood there for a moment, a wave of mundane annoyance washing over them. "Did you park on the 4th level by mistake?" Jenna asked. "No," Liam said, his certainty unwavering. "I never park on 4. I hate the tight turn on the ramp." They began to walk the level, the squeak of their shoes echoing in the quiet garage. They checked every space, every row. No blue Honda Civic. A flicker of real anxiety began to replace the annoyance. Had the car been stolen? Here? In this well-lit, secure garage? Liam pulled out his phone to call security, his thumb hovering over the number. "Wait," Jenna said, pointing towards the far side of the garage. "Is that it?" Liam squinted. Parked in the last row, in space G12, was what looked like their car. "What's it doing over there?" he muttered, more to himself than to Jenna. They walked towards it, their pace quickening. It was their car, same make, same model, same small scratch on the rear bumper from a runaway shopping cart last winter. Liam clicked the key fob in his hand. The car chirped and the lights flashed. I must have been completely out of it," Liam said, shaking his head in disbelief. "I could have sworn we parked in C-34. Jenna laughed, the tension breaking. "You're losing it in your old age." They got in the car, the familiar scent of their own lives. Faint coffee, old books, Jenna's perfume, a comforting reassurance. They joked about it on the drive home, the mystery already relegated to a funny story, a simple case of a tired mind playing tricks. They pulled into the driveway of their suburban home, the garage incident all but forgotten. The next morning, Liam was getting ready for work when his phone buzzed. It was a text from a number he didn't recognize. It was a single image, a photo taken from a high angle. It showed their blue Honda Civic, parked neatly in space C-34 of the parking garage. The timestamp on the photo was from 10:45 p.m. the previous night, just before they had left the cinema. Liam stared at the photo, his blood turning to ice. The photo was proof. He had parked in C-34. So how had the car moved to G12? He showed the text to Jenna, whose face went pale. "Who sent this?" she whispered. Liam tried calling the number. It was disconnected. An unsettling thought began to form in his mind. Had someone moved their car as a prank? Or worse, as a warning? They spent the day in a state of low-grade paranoia, jumping at every unexpected sound. That evening, they decided to drive back to the city, to the parking garage. They had to see it again, to retrace their steps, to find a logical explanation. They parked on the street this time, not wanting to enter the garage itself. They walked up the pedestrian ramp to the third level. The garage was quiet, filled with the same ambient hum as the night before. They walked to space G12, where they had found their car. It was now occupied by a red SUV. Then they walked over to C34, the space next to the pillar. Their car was there. They burst into their house, half expecting to find it ransacked. But everything was normal. Everything was in its place, except for one thing. On the kitchen counter, where Liam always left his keys, sat a single unfamiliar car key. It wasn't a Honda key. It was for a different make, older, with a small plastic fob. Attached to the key was a small metal tag, the kind you get from a valet. It was stamped with the number G12. The car they had driven home last night hadn't been theirs. It had been a copy, a perfect, functional replica that had been waiting for them in the wrong parking space. The next day, Liam reported his car stolen from his driveway. The police were skeptical. "So you're saying the car you reported stolen last night from the city garage wasn't actually stolen? And now your real car is stolen from your driveway?" It sounded insane. They filed a report, but Liam could see the disbelief in their eyes. The car was never found. The anonymous text was never traced. Liam and Jenna tried to move on, to bury the memory of that impossible night. But the event left a scar on their reality. They sold the house and moved to a new city a year later. They bought a new car, a different color, a different make. But the story doesn't end there. 2 years later, in their new city, Liam was in a grocery store parking lot. He was loading groceries into the trunk when he saw it. Parked a few rows away was a blue Honda Civic. It had the same small scratch on the rear bumper. And in the driver's seat, a man who looked eerily familiar was watching him. But that wasn't the most terrifying part. As Liam stared, frozen, another car, an identical blue Honda Civic, pulled into the space right next to the first one. A woman got out. She looked exactly like Jenna. The two figures, the man and the woman, nodded to each other, a shared, silent acknowledgement, before getting into their separate, identical cars and driving away in opposite directions. Liam stood there, a bag of groceries dropped at his feet, milk pooling on the hot asphalt. He realized then that the glitch hadn't been a one-time event. It was a replication, a virus in the system, and it was spreading. He and Jenna hadn't just lost a car that night in the garage. They had lost their exclusivity. They were no longer unique. Their copies were out there, living parallel lives, and for all he knew, there might not be just two of them. There could be dozens, a silent, spreading army of themselves, living lives they would never know. And he was left with a question that would haunt him for the rest of his life. If you can be copied, and the copy is perfect, which one is the original?
It's always later than you think.
Our next account comes from a university student named Maya, a history major who practically lived in the campus library. For her, the library wasn't just a place of study, it was a sanctuary. The hushed reverence, the smell of old paper and binding glue, the endless aisles of silent knowledge. It was a world ordered by logic and time. The grand oak-cased clock that hung above the main reading room was the heartbeat of this sanctuary. Its steady, silent sweep marked the passage of her life in quiet, predictable increments. One night, during the stressful throes of finals week, that heartbeat stopped. And in its stillness, Maya discovered that time itself is a cage. It was a Thursday just before midnight. The library was mostly deserted, home only to the desperate and the sleep-deprived. Maya had staked out her favorite carrel on the third floor, a small, secluded desk surrounded by towering shelves of forgotten periodicals. She was immersed in research for her final paper on the fall of the Roman Empire, surrounded by a fortress of books. Her laptop screen the only bright spot in her dim corner. The air was still, the only sound the faint hum of the building's ventilation and the soft rustle of her turning pages. She worked for hours, losing herself in the annals of history. It was only when a yawn cracked her jaw that she finally leaned back, stretching her arms above her head, and glanced up at the clock on the far wall. It was a large classic clock with elegant Roman numerals and stark black hands. The time was 3:13 a.m. She sighed. Still hours to go until sunrise. She made a mental note to pack up in an hour at 4:15 to get at least a few hours of sleep before her morning exam. She dove back into her work, her fingers flying across the keyboard, her mind 1,000 miles and 2,000 years away. She wrote about logistics, about politics, about the slow, inevitable decay of a great power. She finished a chapter, read it over, and felt a small sense of accomplishment. Feeling like a significant amount of time had passed, she leaned back again and looked at the clock. It read 3:13 a.m. She frowned. That wasn't right. She was certain she had just worked for at least 45 minutes, maybe an hour. She checked her laptop. The time in the corner of her screen also read 3:13 a.m. She rebooted the machine, thinking it had frozen. As the screen came back to life, the time remained stubbornly fixed. 3:13 a.m. A cold knot of confusion began to form in her stomach. She pulled out her phone. The screen was dark, unresponsive. The battery had been fully charged when she arrived. Okay, don't panic, she told herself. There must be a rational explanation. A power surge could have fried her devices and frozen the library's clock system. It was unlikely, but not impossible. It was the only explanation that made sense. She decided to pack up and leave. As she slid her laptop into her bag, she noticed something that made her pause. The low, ambient hum of the library's ventilation system, a sound that had been a constant companion all night, had stopped. The building was now utterly, profoundly silent. The only sound was the frantic pounding of her own heart. She walked out of her carrel and into the main reading room. The vast cavernous space was empty. The grand clock above the entrance confirmed her fear. Its hands were frozen at 3:13. The silence was unnerving. It felt unnatural, as if the entire building was holding its breath. She walked to the large windows that overlooked the campus green. Outside, the world seemed normal. A gentle snow was falling, the flakes dancing in the orange glow of the streetlights. A campus security car made its slow, steady patrol down the main path. She let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. It was just the library. A weird, localized power issue. She would just go home. She walked to the massive oak front doors and pulled on the heavy brass handle. It didn't move. She pulled again, with all her strength. The door was locked, solidly, immovably locked. She tried the other door, same result. Panic began to bubble in her chest. The library closed at 2 a.m., but the main doors were never locked until the morning cleaning crew arrived at 6. She was trapped. She ran through the silent building, checking every possible exit. The emergency doors in the back were sealed shut, their push bars unyielding. The windows were old, thick plate glass, impossible to break. She was a prisoner in her own sanctuary. She returned to the main reading room, her mind racing. She tried her phone again. Still dead. She looked up at the clock. 3:13. It hadn't moved. It was mocking her with its stillness. She slumped into one of the large leather armchairs, her head in her hands, trying to think. It was then she heard it. A soft, rhythmic sound from the far end of the room. A soft thump scrape. Thump scrape. She looked up. At the entrance to the West Wing, where the history archives were kept, a figure had appeared. It was an old man, stooped and frail, wearing the dark gray uniform of the library's janitorial staff. He was pushing a large wheeled trash bin, its rubber wheels making that soft, scraping sound on the polished floor. "Hello?" Maya called out, a wave of relief so powerful it almost made her weep. "Oh my God! Hello, I'm trapped in here." The janitor didn't seem to hear her. He continued his slow, methodical work, emptying a small trash can into his bin with practiced, weary movements. "Sir," Maya shouted, standing up and walking towards him. "Can you hear me? The doors are locked." She was 20 feet away when the old man finally stopped. He slowly turned his head to look at her. His face was a mask of placid indifference. His eyes were pale, cloudy, and seemed to look straight through her. He didn't speak. He just stared for a long, unsettling moment, then turned back to his work, resuming his slow, rhythmic pushing of the bin down the silent corridor. Thump scrape, thump scrape. Maya stood frozen, a new kind of fear taking hold. He had seen her. He had looked right at her, but he hadn't reacted. It was as if she didn't exist. She followed him down the corridor, her voice growing more desperate. "Please, you have to help me. What's happening? Why are the doors locked?" He never acknowledged her. He continued his work, a silent, spectral figure going through the motions of a job that no longer needed doing. He emptied another can, then another, his movements slow and unending. She reached out to touch his shoulder, to force a reaction, but her hand stopped just inches from his uniform. An invisible, cold barrier seemed to press against her palm. She couldn't touch him. She backed away, her mind struggling to reconcile what was happening. She was a ghost in her own time. She ran back to the main reading room and looked up at the clock. Still 3:13. She looked out the window. The snow was still falling. The security car was still making its slow, endless loop around the campus green. The world outside was moving, but she was trapped here in a single frozen moment. For what felt like hours, she paced the silent library, a prisoner of time. The old janitor continued his Sisyphean task, forever cleaning a library that would never get dirty, forever ignoring the desperate girl trapped with him. Then the nature of the glitch shifted. She was standing in front of a bookshelf in the philosophy section when she noticed a book on the floor. It was a heavy, leather-bound volume she had never seen before. She picked it up. The title was embossed in gold. The Axioms of Temporal Mechanics. There was no author listed. She opened it. The pages were filled with complex equations and diagrams that she didn't understand, but the text was written in a clear, concise prose. It was a theoretical physics textbook, but unlike any she had ever seen. One chapter title caught her eye. Chapter 7, Temporal Loops and Isolated System Failures. She began to read. The text described a rare but predictable phenomenon where a closed system, under extreme energetic or gravitational stress, could temporarily desync from the normal flow of spacetime, creating a pocket reality where time ceases to progress linearly. It described the sensory experience of being inside such a loop, the cessation of ambient sound, the failure of electronic devices, the perceived repetition of external events. And it described the echoes, residual psychic imprints of people who had performed the same routine in that location for years, now stuck in an endless, mindless loop of their own. The janitor wasn't a ghost. He was an echo of a man who had likely cleaned these floors every night for decades. The final paragraph of the chapter made her blood run cold. An isolated system failure is, by nature, unstable. It will inevitably seek to correct itself. This correction often manifests as a system reboot, a violent and instantaneous restoration of normal temporal flow. Any foreign biological or conscious matter present within the isolated system at the moment of reboot is unlikely to maintain its structural or cognitive integrity. In layman's terms, it is not advisable to be present when the clock starts ticking again. As she read the final word, the book in her hands dissolved into a fine gray dust that slipped through her fingers. She stared at her empty hands, her heart hammering. The book had been a part of the glitch, a temporary manifestation of the rules of her new prison, and it had just given her a death sentence. She had to get out. She didn't know how, but she knew she had to escape the library before the reboot. She ran back to the main doors, pounding on them with her fists, screaming until her throat was raw. The janitor continued his silent, endless rounds, completely oblivious. She looked up at the clock. It was still 3:13, but something was different. The second hand, which had been frozen, began to twitch. A tiny spastic movement, back and forth. The reboot was coming. She scanned the room, her eyes wild with panic. Then she saw it. The window in the main reading room, the one overlooking the campus green. It was her only chance. She grabbed one of the heavy leather armchairs and, with a surge of adrenaline, began to drag it across the floor towards the window. It was heavy, but her terror gave her strength. She heaved it up and, with a desperate cry, swung it against the massive plate glass window. The first impact did nothing but send a spider web of cracks across the surface. The twitching of the clock's second hand grew more frantic. The janitor's movements began to stutter, to glitch. She swung the chair. Again, the window bowed outwards. Again, the glass exploded in a shower of glittering shards, the sound deafening in the silent library. The cold night air rushed in, a shock to her system. The alarm bells of the library, silent until now, began to shriek, a piercing modern sound that was utterly alien in this frozen moment. She didn't hesitate. She climbed through the broken window, cutting her hands on the jagged edges of the glass, and dropped 10 feet to the snowy ground below. She landed hard, the impact jarring her bones, but she scrambled to her feet and ran. She ran across the snow-covered green, not daring to look back. The library alarms wailed behind her, a sound that was both a warning and a farewell. She didn't stop running until she reached her dorm room, collapsing inside and locking the door behind her. She looked at her alarm clock. It read 4:16 a.m. An hour had passed. A single, impossible hour. The next day, the campus was buzzing with the news. The library had been vandalized. A window smashed, an armchair lying on the snow outside. Her phone and laptop, which she had left behind, were found on her carrel on the 3rd floor. No one could explain what had happened. There was no sign of a break-in. The library's clocks, the campus IT department reported, had suffered a bizarre, system-wide malfunction, freezing for an indeterminate amount of time before inexplicably resetting themselves. Maya never told anyone the full story. She knew they wouldn't believe her. But she carries the knowledge of that night with her, a cold, hard knot of terror. She knows that reality is not as stable as we believe. She knows that time can break, and she knows that she was lucky. She got out, but she is forever haunted by a question she can never answer. What happens to the things and the people who are left behind when the clock starts ticking again?
Watch your step. Always.
Our next story comes from a man named David, a 54-year-old retired carpenter who knew his home better than he knew himself. He had built it with his own hands 20 years earlier, on a quiet, wooded lot just outside of town. He knew the groan of every floorboard, the precise catch in the kitchen door, the way the afternoon sun slanted through the living room window, and he knew the stairs to his basement. There were 12 of them. 12 solid oak steps that he had cut, sanded, and installed himself. It was a fact as fundamental and unchanging as gravity. 12 steps down, 12 steps up. For 20 years, this had been the rule. Until one ordinary Monday, when the house decided to change its own architecture. David was heading to the basement to retrieve a jar of his late wife's famous pickled beets from the pantry shelf. It was a small, bittersweet ritual he performed every few weeks. He opened the basement door, flicked on the single bare bulb that hung from the ceiling, and began his descent. His feet knew the way. He didn't need to look down. His body had memorized the rhythm of the staircase over 2 decades. His hand rested lightly on the cool wooden handrail. 1, 2, 3. He counted subconsciously, his mind already on the beats, the memories they would bring. 8, 9, 10, 11. His foot reached for the familiar solid concrete of the basement floor, but it wasn't there. Instead, his foot landed on another wooden step. A 13th step. The unexpected sensation, the jarring miscalculation of a movement performed thousands of times, sent a jolt of confusion through him. He stumbled, catching himself on the handrail, and looked down. There it was. A 13th oak step, identical in every way to the 12 that preceded it. It was not new. It had the same scuffs, the same worn finish. It looked as if it had always been there. and it led not to the familiar concrete floor, but directly into a solid brick wall that stood where the entrance to his basement should have been. He stared, his logical carpenter's mind refusing to accept the sensory data. This was impossible. He had built this staircase. He had laid the concrete floor. There was no brick wall at the bottom of his basement stairs. He backed up a step, then another, ascending back to the top. He closed the basement door, took a deep breath, and counted to 10. "I'm tired," he told himself. "My mind is playing tricks on me. I miscounted. I tripped." He tried to rationalize it, to find a logical foothold in a situation that had none. He opened the door again and looked down. The scene had not changed. 12 familiar steps, followed by a 13th, impossible one, ending in a featureless wall of old red brick. The single bare bulb cast a weak yellow light on it, revealing the texture of the mortar, the small chips and imperfections in the bricks. It was undeniably real. He descended the stairs again, slowly this time, his hand gripping the railing tightly. He counted each step aloud. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 12. He stood on the 12th step, his heart pounding. Below him was the 13th step, and beyond it, the wall. He cautiously placed his foot on the 13th step. It was solid. It held his weight. It didn't creak or groan. It simply existed. He reached out a trembling hand and touched the brick wall. It was cold, rough, and solid as the earth itself. There was no hint of a doorway, no seam, no illusion. He was standing on a staircase to nowhere, inside his own home. He began to search for an explanation, his mind clinging to the wreckage of logic. Had someone come into his house while he was out? Had they built this wall, added this step? The idea was absurd. It would have taken days, created a mess of dust and debris. The basement, visible from the top of the stairs, was exactly as he had left it. The door had been locked. He noticed a strange quality to the air around the wall. It was colder, and it had a faint metallic smell, like ozone after a thunderstorm. And it was silent. The usual ambient sounds of the house, the hum of the refrigerator, upstairs, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, were gone. The space around the 13th step and the wall existed in a pocket of profound, unnatural silence. He spent the next hour in a state of controlled panic, trying to debunk his own senses. He measured the steps. They were identical in height and depth. He examined the woodwork. The 13th step was seamlessly integrated into the structure, the wood grain matching, the varnish aged to the same patina. To any observer, it would look as if the staircase had been designed this way from the very beginning. He decided he needed proof he wasn't going mad. He went back upstairs, grabbed a piece of chalk from his workshop, and drew a large X on the center of the brick wall. Then he went back to the top of the stairs, closed the basement door, and waited. He set a timer for 5 minutes. When it chimed, he opened the door. The staircase was back to normal, 12 steps leading down to the familiar, solid concrete floor of his basement. The brick wall was gone. He rushed down the stairs, his heart a frantic drum. The air was normal. The hum of the fridge was audible again. He reached the bottom and looked back. 12 steps. Only 12. He let out a shaky, relieved laugh. It had been a hallucination. A vivid, terrifying, but ultimately unreal experience. He had been working too hard in the garden. He hadn't been sleeping well, that was all. He turned to go to the pantry shelf to get the beets, his original mission. But as he turned, his gaze fell upon the concrete floor at the base of the stairs, the spot where the brick wall had stood just moments before. And on the concrete, in faint white dust, was the unmistakable trace of a large X he had just drawn. The world tilted. The relief evaporated, replaced by a fear so profound it left him breathless. It had been real. The step, the wall, all of it. He hadn't been hallucinating. The house itself was changing, rewriting its own layout, and then erasing the evidence. But it had made a mistake. It had forgotten to erase the chalk. He didn't go into the basement for a week. He boarded the door shut, nailing planks of wood across it. He tried to forget. He tried to live in the upper levels of his house as if the world beneath his feet wasn't fundamentally broken, but the knowledge of it was a poison. Every creak of the house, every groan of the plumbing, now seemed like a prelude to another shift, another glitch in his home's impossible geometry. One night, he was woken by a loud crash from downstairs. He grabbed the heavy flashlight he now kept by his bed and crept down the stairs. In the living room, a large framed painting had fallen from the wall. The glass shattered across the floor. But that wasn't what made him freeze. The wall where the painting had hung for 20 years was no longer a wall. It was a dark, open doorway leading into a long corridor he had never seen before. A cold, musty draft was blowing out of it. He didn't explore it. He ran back upstairs, packed a single bag, and left the house he had built with his own hands, abandoning it to its shifting, impossible architecture. He drove to his sister's house 3 states away and never returned. He tried to sell the house through a realtor, but the inspectors reported strange structural anomalies. They noted that the blueprints didn't match the building's actual layout. There were inconsistencies, a staircase that didn't appear on the plans, a hallway that ended in a solid wall where a room should have been. The house was deemed unsellable, condemned by its own impossible nature. David still has nightmares. Not about monsters or ghosts, but about architecture. He dreams of hallways that loop back on themselves, of doors that open onto brick walls, and of staircases that gain new steps in the dark, each one leading him deeper into a place he can't escape. He knows that he didn't just build a house, he built a cage, and he doesn't know if the thing that lives inside its shifting walls is a prisoner or the warden.
You're lost now.
Our next story is about a delivery driver named Thomas, a man whose entire life was a map of predictable routes. For 8 years, he had navigated the labyrinth of his city, his mind a flawless GPS of shortcuts, back alleys, and traffic patterns. He trusted the grid. He trusted the asphalt. He believed that no matter what, the road would always lead him where it was supposed to go. This story is about the night the map lied. It was a late shift, well past midnight. Thomas was on his final delivery of the night, a simple pizza order to a familiar suburban neighborhood on the west side of town. He was tired, his mind numb from the endless cycle of traffic lights and turn signals. He decided to take his usual shortcut home, a quiet, winding road called Sycamore Lane that cut through an old, peaceful residential area, bypassing the main highway. He had driven it hundreds, if not thousands of times. It was a muscle memory, a path so ingrained he could have driven it with his eyes closed. He turned off the main boulevard and onto the entrance of Sycamore Lane. The familiar arching trees created a canopy overhead, the streetlights casting a dappled, gentle glow on the pavement. He passed the corner market, its neon sign humming softly. He passed the small park with the lonely swing set. Everything was exactly as it should be. He drove for about 3 minutes, the road curving gently through the quiet houses. But as he continued, a subtle sense of unease began to prickle at the back of his mind. The houses seemed farther apart, the spaces between them filled with trees that seemed taller, denser than he remembered. He shook his head, blaming fatigue. The mind plays tricks when you're tired. He continued driving. The road, which should have straightened out and connected back to the highway after another half-mile, just kept curving. The familiar houses disappeared entirely, replaced by a solid wall of dark, imposing forest on both sides. The pavement under his tires became rougher, cracked, the painted lines fading into nothing. The streetlights, once a comforting yellow, were now a sickly pale white, and they were spaced much farther apart, leaving vast stretches of profound, unnerving darkness between them. A knot of anxiety tightened in his chest. Had he taken a wrong turn? It seemed impossible. There were no other turns on Sycamore Lane. He had checked his GPS earlier. It showed the familiar, correct route. He glanced at it now. The screen was frozen, displaying his position at the entrance to Sycamore Lane, a blinking blue dot on a road he had left miles behind. He slowed the delivery van, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The forest pressed in on both sides. The trees, impossibly tall pines and oaks he had never seen in this part of the city, so dense they seemed to suck the very light from his headlights. The air grew colder. He could see his own breath fogging in front of him, despite it being a mild autumn night. He had to turn back. This was wrong, all wrong. He found a small muddy patch on the side of the road and attempted a three-point turn. As his headlights swung around, they illuminated something that made his heart stop. It was a sign, an old wooden sign, weathered and covered in moss, nailed to one of the massive pines. The letters were hand-carved, faded with age. It read, "Beware the whispering path. It does not forgive." Thomas stared at the sign, his mind refusing to process. This wasn't Sycamore Lane. This wasn't his city. He was somewhere else entirely. He had driven down a familiar road and emerged into a place that shouldn't exist. The road hadn't just changed, it had been replaced. Panic set in. He slammed the van into drive and sped back the way he came, his tires slipping in the mud. He drove faster and faster, his eyes desperately searching for the familiar lights of the city, for the corner market, for the small park. But the strange, dark road just stretched on, an endless corridor of silent, watching trees. After what felt like an eternity, he saw a light ahead. Not a street light, but a warm yellow glow, like a lantern. It was hanging from the porch of a small, dilapidated cabin set back in the woods. A building he knew for a fact was not on Sycamore Lane. A thin curl of smoke rose from its chimney. He was lost. His phone was dead, his GPS frozen. He had no choice. He pulled over, the van's engine sounding loud and intrusive in the oppressive silence. He got out and walked towards the cabin, each step a reluctant capitulation to his impossible situation. The door creaked open before he could knock. An old woman stood in the doorway. She was ancient, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes a pale, cloudy blue. She held a lit lantern in one hand. "You took the wrong path, boy," she said, her voice a dry, papery rustle. "The whispering path. It doesn't always let you go back." "Where am I?" Thomas asked, his voice trembling. "This isn't Sycamore Lane." The old woman gave a slow, sad shake of her head. "It is, and it isn't. Sometimes the old roads remember what they used to be. This path, it remembers the forest. It remembers the time before the city." She looked him up and down. "It doesn't like intruders." I have to get back," Thomas stammered. "My family." "There is a way," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "But it demands a toll. The path, it takes something, a memory, a precious one. You must offer it willingly. Leave it behind on the road. Only then will it let you pass." Thomas thought she was insane, a crazy old woman living alone in the woods. But what other explanation did he have? The impossible road, the frozen GPS, the sign. He was desperate. "What memory?" he asked. "The most important one you have of the person you love most?" she whispered, her cloudy eyes seeming to look into his very soul. "Your first dance with your wife, the day your daughter was born. It must be real. It must have weight. The path will know if you lie." The thought was monstrous. To willingly sacrifice a memory like that. It was a violation. But what was the alternative? To be trapped on this endless, whispering road forever. He stood there on the porch for a long time, the cold seeping into his bones. Finally, he made a decision. He closed his eyes and focused with all his might on a single, perfect memory. The moment his daughter Lily had taken her first steps. He saw her small, determined face, her unsteady wobble, the look of pure, triumphant joy as she stumbled into his arms. He held on to the memory, felt its warmth, its love, and then, with a silent, wrenching effort, he let it go. He offered it. To the road, to the forest, to the ancient, hungry path. He felt a sudden, profound emptiness, a hollowness in his chest where the memory used to be. He knew with a sickening certainty that something precious had just been ripped away from him. "Go, now," the old woman said, her voice soft. "Drive and do not look back. Do not stop until you see the lights of your own world. He stumbled back to his van, his mind a confusing fog. He got in and drove. He didn't look back at the cabin, didn't look at the trees. He just stared ahead at the winding, dark road. And slowly, impossibly, the world began to change. The tall pines began to thin, replaced by familiar oak trees. The cracked asphalt became smooth again. The pale white streetlights gave way to the warm yellow glow he knew. He saw the small park with the swing set. He saw the corner market. He turned onto the main boulevard, the city's noise a comforting, chaotic symphony. He drove home in a daze, his mind struggling to piece together what had happened. It had to have been a dream, a fugue state brought on by exhaustion. He walked into his house. His wife, Maria, was asleep on the couch. He knelt beside her, a wave of love and relief so powerful it made him dizzy. He was home. He was safe. The next day, life was normal. Almost. He felt a strange, nagging sense of loss, a phantom limb of the heart. That evening, Maria was looking through old photo albums. She laughed, turning a page to show him. "Look," she said. "I forgot we had this." It was a photo of their daughter Lily as a toddler. She was standing in their living room, her face a mask of fierce concentration, taking a wobbly, uncertain step forward. "I don't remember this," Thomas said, his voice flat. A cold dread washed over him. Maria frowned. "What are you talking about?" It was her first steps. "You cried for an hour." Thomas stared at the photograph. He saw a picture of a child. But the memory, the feeling, the joy of that moment, it was gone. It was a blank space in his soul. The path had taken its toll. He was home, but he had left a piece of himself behind, on a dark, forgotten road that sometimes, when the world isn't looking, remembers what it used to be.
Recalculating.
Our final story is about the smallest of glitches, a moment so fleeting, so insignificant, it could be easily dismissed. But it is often in these tiny, momentary fractures of the real that we find the most profound terror. This account comes from a woman named Amelia, who learned that even the most joyful, mundane moments are not safe from the quiet, chilling errors of our reality. Amelia's dog, a golden retriever named Buster, was her world. He was a creature of pure, uncomplicated joy, and their daily trips to the park were the highlight of her day. The park was a wide, open expanse of green grass and old, shady oak trees. It was a place of comforting predictability. The same people walked the same paths at the same time every day. The same dogs chased the same squirrels. One bright, cloudless afternoon, Amelia was playing fetch with Buster. She would throw his favorite slobber-covered tennis ball as far as she could, and he would bound after it with an ecstatic, clumsy grace that always made her laugh. It was a perfect, ordinary moment, a snapshot of happiness. She threw the ball high, a long, looping arc against the brilliant blue sky. Buster, as always, was a blur of golden fur, his eyes locked on the ball, his powerful legs eating up the distance. He leaped into the air at the precise moment to catch it, his jaws open, his body suspended in a perfect, joyful leap. And then he stopped. He didn't just slow down, he froze, mid-air. 1 foot forward, 1 back, his mouth open, his ears flopped back. He was a perfect, three-dimensional photograph of a leaping dog, hanging impossibly in the air, about 4 feet off the ground. The tennis ball was frozen too, just inches from his mouth. Amelia stared, her mind unable to process the impossible sight. It lasted for maybe 2, 3 seconds. A lifetime. The world was silent. The breeze stopped. A bird that had been crossing. The sky was also frozen in place. She was looking at a paused world. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. Reality snapped back into place. The bird continued its flight. The breeze rustled the leaves in the trees, and Buster, with a happy yelp, completed his leap, snatched the ball from the air, and landed on the grass with a soft thud. He trotted back to her, tail wagging, and dropped the slobbery ball at her feet, completely unaware that he had just, for a few impossible seconds, broken the laws of physics. Amelia stood frozen, the laughter dying in her throat. Her heart was pounding. Had she imagined it? A waking dream? A trick of the light and an overactive imagination? She looked around. No one else seemed to have noticed. A couple on a nearby bench were still talking. A man jogging on the path hadn't broken his stride. It was her secret, a terrifying, impossible glitch that only she had seen. She tried to continue playing, but the joy was gone. Every time she threw the ball, she held her breath, half expecting Buster to freeze again in midair. He never did. The game was normal. The park was normal. But something in Amelia's perception of the world had been permanently fractured. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the moment in her head, the impossible stillness, the perfect frozen image of her dog hanging in the air. She tried to find a logical explanation, an optical illusion, a micro-sleep where she had dreamed the event, but she knew what she had seen. It was real. The next day, she took Buster back to the park, a knot of anxiety in her stomach. She went to the same spot. She threw the ball. Buster chased it. Everything was normal. She began to relax, to convince herself that it had been a one-time, inexplicable event, something to be filed away and forgotten. She threw the ball again, this time towards the large oak tree at the edge of the field. Buster bounded after it. The ball bounced off the trunk of the tree, and Buster, in his excitement, ran headfirst into it with a loud thump. He yelped, a sound of surprise and pain, and crumpled to the ground. Amelia ran to him, her heart in her throat. He was whimpering, favoring his front paw. She gently examined him, her hands running over his leg. It wasn't broken, likely just a sprain. She knelt beside him, stroking his fur, murmuring comforting words. It was then she noticed the tennis ball. It had rolled to a stop a few feet away, but as she looked at it, she saw that it wasn't moving. It was vibrating. A low, intense hum emanated from it, and the ball itself seemed to be buzzing, its fuzzy yellow surface a blur of motion. She reached out a hesitant hand towards it. As her fingers got closer, the humming grew louder, and the air around the ball grew cold. Then, the ball split open. Not like a normal tennis ball, which is hollow. This one split open like a seed pod, peeling back in 4 perfect symmetrical sections, and inside, there was nothing. Not empty space, just a shimmering black void that seemed to absorb the light around it. It was a hole in the world, a pocket of pure nothingness, small enough to fit in the palm of her hand. She scrambled backward, pulling Buster with her, her mind screaming. The 4 sections of the tennis ball then slowly, deliberately, folded back in on themselves, sealing the void within. The humming stopped. It was just a normal tennis ball again, lying innocently in the grass. She didn't wait to understand. She scooped up the whimpering Buster and ran, leaving the ball, the park, and her sanity behind. She went straight to the vet. The vet examined Buster's leg and found nothing wrong. No sprain, no fracture, not even any tenderness. He was perfectly fine. That night, Amelia was trying to process the day's events. The glitching dog, the vibrating, void-filled tennis ball, the miraculous recovery. It was too much. She was sitting in her living room, staring blankly at the wall, when she heard a faint sound from the kitchen. A soft, bouncing sound. Boing, boing, boing. It was the sound of a tennis ball being dropped on a tile floor. She froze. Buster was asleep at her feet. She had left the ball in the park. She had watched it become something impossible, and she had run from it. She stood up slowly and crept towards the kitchen. The bouncing stopped. She peered around the corner. The kitchen was empty. But there, in the center of the clean, white tile floor, sat the tennis ball, her dog's favorite slobber-covered ball. She backed away, her hand fumbling for her phone to call the police, to call someone, anyone. But as she looked at the ball, it began to vibrate again, the low hum filling the silent house. It split open, revealing the shimmering black void inside. But this time it wasn't empty. 2 tiny, brilliant points of white light ignited within the void like distant, cold stars, and they were looking at her. The ball wasn't a glitch. It was a probe, a recording device from somewhere else. And the first glitch, the paused dog, hadn't been an error. It had been the system lagging as it downloaded a perfect copy of her world. The void inside the ball began to expand, the blackness spilling out onto her kitchen floor like ink. A creeping, silent tide of nothingness that began to erase the tiles, the cabinets, the very reality of her home. The last thing Amelia saw before the void reached her was her own reflection in its shimmering dark surface. And in the reflection, she saw Buster, tail wagging, happily chasing a tennis ball across a wide green field under a brilliant blue sky. A perfect, ordinary moment. A snapshot of a happiness that was no longer real. A floor that shouldn't exist. A moment in time that refused to end. A staircase that rewrote itself. And a single perfect moment that revealed the code underneath our world. We live our lives assuming the rules are fixed. That time only moves forward. That space is constant. That what we see is what is real. But these stories suggest something else entirely. They suggest that our reality is a fragile construct, a program that can lag, crash, and reveal terrifying errors. These glitches aren't spirits or demons. They are something far more unsettling, proof that the very foundation of our existence might be an illusion. What do you do when the map of your world is suddenly rewritten? You are left with a terrifying truth. You are not a player in a game. You are a ghost, living inside the machine. If these stories fractured your sense of reality, prove you're still here by subscribing to Whispered Fear, leaving a like, and sharing this video. Every interaction helps us document the moments when the system fails. Now, if you're ready to hear from those who have crossed the final boundary, click the video on your screen for our next investigation. 4. True scary stories of receiving phone calls from a deceased loved one. See you there. When the line connects,